Lisa, the chair, and we are going to wait a few minutes for more people to join. Thank you. This is Lisa, Camille. I'm going to need to join twice. My computer at home does not have a camera or microphone, so there will be one of me that's mute and one that will be speaking.
Okay, no problem.
And Camille, do we know if there are people that are not planning to attend?
I have not heard from anyone that they were not planning to attend. It looks like we are missing Hoover, Kathy, and Elaine, but we can go ahead and get started whenever you are ready to do so. And just as a reminder, from my email last week, we have the agenda item swap. So we will be doing the GM update as the first agenda item.
Yes, I have that as an announcement that I will be making in my remarks. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm almost there. So let's just wait a couple more minutes while I get everything pulled up. I'm actually homesick today, so I am not my perky best, but hopefully I will not be too out of it. There we go. I am now 2 people. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will want to move some of the chair's remarks to later. I am not able to open the document at this time. So I'm going to take a look at the agenda and see if we can also move some of my remarks. I wanted to comment on the the survey, and I don't have that information in front of me right now. So I would like to change that to later. LTD staff, is there further consideration other than later that I need to say? I would be happy to, for instance, have that be the last thing we talk about in the meeting.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, you can fit it in when you can.
Okay, thank you.
And if you just want to kick it off, we can turn it over to TransPro, the GM recruiter, and they can go through their process while you're working through your technical difficulties.
And I think that the one thing that I did need to note was that we were going to move that to the beginning. And my understanding is that I need to state that will be moved from 8:4 to 8:1, something like that on the agenda. So if we can do that, I would like to go ahead and have, I'm sorry, I did not catch the name of that person, present their materials.
Sure. Really quickly, I'm not sure if we have anyone or not, but we should provide the opportunity for audience participation really quickly before we jump into the agenda item.
Thank you.
And I am happy to read through the instructions to give anybody a moment.
Okay.
Actually, for the audience, if there is anyone wishing to provide public testimony, I'll give you just a moment. If you would please use the raise your hand indicator. And it looks like we don't have anyone. Thank you so much, Lisa. I just wanted to make sure we did publicly allow the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So if that has been taken care of, would it be okay to scroll down on the agenda for me, please? Okay. So we are moving to item 8C, and that is the general manager recruitment process. Do we have someone here who can speak to that, or is that?
Yes, ma'am. How are you? This is, I'll turn my camera on. How are you? This is Aaron Bingaman with TransPro Consulting. Apologize for the pause there. Was not a traditional unmute process. Great to see so many folks, members of the board, as well as some members of the community that we've had the chance to meet, a couple that we haven't yet had an opportunity to meet. Want to be sure on the topic, Mark, before I go too far. Do we want to lead through discussion, or are we giving a process update? I just want to make sure I'm on mission here. Apologies.
Yeah, we're seeking their input.
Excellent.
So
Terrific.
you know, it's a little shorter version than we have been doing, because we've got another one at 1:45. But
sounds good.
We can go through the process.
My apologies, folks. We've had so many community engagement opportunities that lost track of my mission from each one. The one, Aaron Bingaman, managing principal with TransPro Consulting, joined also by the head of our executive placement practice, Mike Setzer, as well as Chanel Nichols, who's our executive recruiter. I've been leading up to this point through the stakeholder engagement process, and those two will be taking over the charge into the actual recruitment process, which we intend to start really soon. Hopefully you can see a screen with a couple slides on it, really high level, and then we'll dive right into a couple key questions. We're going through a multi-step process, collaborating with the board, collaborating with community stakeholders, collaborating with the employees to really understand the agency's priorities and those core competencies and credentials that the community is telling us they truly value in the next leader for the district. So we have lost track of the number of public meetings that we've had. I think Mark might know, or public meetings, I guess, community stakeholder meetings that we've had. We also have had a survey in the field that will wrap today to community members and employees to help inform this process. And the key here has been in this early stage to make sure we have a really clear understanding of what success looks like, the key characteristics, competencies, the experiences of our next general manager and CEO, and being intentional about listening to that input. We will craft that into a summary for the board, as well as use this input to directly influence the job description, as well as the evaluation criteria and interview questions and such that we would recommend to the board as they use in the process going forward. And our intent here is to pull this together for the board's action at their working session on the 2nd to approve a job description so that we can go forward with the advertising and recruitment process. So continuing that dialogue, this will be, I think we have 2 more engagements yet today, and then we'll put a bow on our stakeholder engagement. But again, triangulating all that information to make sure we got a really solid foundation for those characteristics and competencies that our next general manager and CEO has. We have done some work with the board to understand some potential characteristics and profiles through a tool called the Predictive Index. The Predictive Index is something that we use in understanding characteristics, the strongest characteristics of an individual. The Predictive Index uses a couple questions for a respondent to define that profile, and then you can use it as a guide to just really help understand how somebody thinks about solving a problem. What's interesting about this tool is you can also ask a hiring body to answer some of the questions, and it gives us at least some initial insights into what might be some of the strongest characteristics that the organization sees as essential to success. To be sure, these are not the only characteristics. To be sure, it's not trying to fit somebody into one of these personality profiles as we go through. It's just a tool to help us understand some of the keys and ideas. And we've been using it in our stakeholder engagement conversations to get conversations started, and would love to actually start here as a conversation with you all on this point. And that is, as the board completed the survey, this little 2-question profile thing, the strengths that emerged from the perspective of board members at that time were these 3 profiles. So listen to them carefully. A captain is a problem solver who likes change and innovation while controlling the big picture. A persuader is risk-taking, socially poised, and motivating team builder. A strategist is results-oriented, innovative, and analytical with a drive for change. So as we think about those characteristics that are reflected in how the board responded to some of the questions and start to emerge maybe as some of the stronger characteristics of our next general manager and CEO, we ask you today, what resonates with you? Is there something obvious that's missing from there that you would expect to see? So as we start to think about the people we meet and screen and suggest might be good fits for the district, what are those characteristics you'll be looking for? What resonates here off of those descriptions? Don't all go at once.
I think empathy is very big for me, that we have a new general manager who empathizes with the riders around them, especially, riders that are disabled or have a disability.
Terrific insight. Empathy, very powerful characteristic and strength. Thank you for that. Other characteristics that you would expect to see, maybe didn't, or that resonate particularly here with you, I will share that through our community conversations, it's not possible typically for folks to say, oh, it must be this one or it must be that one, right? They see value in each of these 3 different profiles and say, well, it's probably some blend of those. I don't want to tip some of the other words that we've heard other folks say, but curious additional reactions and thoughts to these concepts. Okay, not hearing any, so now I will tip. A couple other words we've heard where collaborator or collaborative communication, listener, really hearing those themes come through strong in our dialogue. So no other thoughts on this. I'll keep rolling ahead for us. As I think most of us know, the district has a set of values, and those values are all really, really important. The values, the way we think about them is, these are the characteristics that we expect all of our employees to show up with in the delivery of the work that we do, right? And these are all very important. If we were to prioritize one or two, right, really hardcore one or two must-haves, non-negotiables, what are the values that you really hope are reflected in a successful candidate for the general manager CEO? Are there two that really stand out for you that you think are critically important to their success? And the ones on the board are respect, integrity, innovation, equity, safety, and collaboration.
Hi, this is Lisa. I just wanted to say that I feel that it's hard to pick two because so many of them are interlocked with each other. For me, respect, equity, and safety. Of course, innovation, you can't, if you can recognize all those other pieces, but if you don't innovate, then there isn't, you can't go anywhere with them. So that's my thinking on that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's great. Thank you. Other thoughts, feedback on any of the values? I think the main question that we want to ask, and I'll skip ahead here to these three, is really to make sure we've got great understanding of the competencies, the experiences that you'll be looking for in that next general manager and CEO, and things that we have heard. So I'll set the stage this way. Some themes that emerge: experience working with the board, experience with really intentional, somebody who really enjoys community, public, stakeholder engagement, and intentionally engaging the community in that dialogue. Somebody that's proven an ability to lead through change, manage change. I think one of the things that's interesting and would love a reaction from this body is transit experience is nice to have, but not necessarily a need to have. That they value the role that transit plays, right? To the point, Ms. Hensley's point about empathy, right? They empathize with the rider and the customer experience, but that maybe the team is in place on the transportation experience side, and that let's get a great leader that can be a champion and face of transit in Lane County and in the Eugene and Springfield communities. So some thoughts and reactions to that, other competencies and experiences you might be looking for. And I'm going to take down my slides at that point, just have a conversation here. Reactions to that? Does it have to be a transit professional or not? How do you feel about that?
I feel it would help if our general manager had some sort of background of riding the city bus sometime in their life. It doesn't need to be now, but I feel it would help if somewhere along their lifetime they did ride public transportation. Sure.
Yeah, that makes a really good, it makes a good point, right? We've had experiences where some communities actually make the expectation that their general manager and CEO would be a regular customer. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be a daily customer, but use it with purpose. So that's a really thoughtful perspective, Ms. Hensley. Other thoughts on competencies and experiences that you'll be looking for? What advice would you want to give the board in terms of how they evaluate our next general manager and CEO? What's a question you would hope they might ask the next general manager and CEO in the interview process?
I would think that maybe it would be something along the lines of whether they have experience themselves or have a person in their life who has needed to use accessible transportation. I think there are lots of things that are important and that you've touched on a lot of them. But again, what we need to speak to in this committee is accessibility. And so I think that is a really important point. I think that a lot of people have somebody in their life that has been in that situation. And so I think that speaking to what that means to them, not just that it exists and they know somebody, but how that would inform their decision-making and work around accessibility would be important.
Sure. And we've, consistently heard a high value in every dialogue around vulnerable populations, as well as, diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of practice and a priority for the individual. Being able to demonstrate, and I think at least the way I would see that, sorry, Madam Chair, is the question being, demonstrate to us how, where and how you've worked to improve access to mobility and mobility infrastructure in, previous places you've worked, or how you overcome traditional challenges or new and innovative ideas to be able to close gaps. I think something, questions along those lines to help us understand, does somebody understand, that aspect of our community and customer base, and B, can they demonstrate some ability to work through it? And again, that wouldn't necessarily have to be in the construct of a transportation agency, right? Understanding the principles and values of access and working to improve access can touch along a lot of different lines. It could be somebody from, education or healthcare or something like that, that might have some insight for us as part of the solution. Other thoughts on this? I got one other question we've enjoyed asking that wasn't necessarily a part of our original script, but has emerged for us, and that everybody at this table understands what unique and wonderful community Lane County, Eugene, Springfield is. It's diverse and has different components, and its urban aspects and its rural aspects. And we've obviously heard loud and clear a value around communication and listening, being an engaged member of the community to connect with people. So those things are emerging as really important. The question I would ask is that, what's the advice you would give to our successful general manager and CEO in successfully navigating the community? What's the advice you would give that person in helping them succeed in the role and navigate the community? What would you want to make sure they knew about succeeding in our community? Any ideas there?
I'm guessing this is, no, Brianna, please go.
Oh, I guess I would just think of holding the disability community as such a big part of the Eugene community in Springfield. And in order to understand the general population, it's important to look at the population of riders with disabilities.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
And I was just going to say, this is probably not a novel idea, but of course, writing and seeing who the population is, my feeling is that, there certainly are a lot of people who, for reasons of, saving the planet, et cetera, ride the bus because they want to, not because they need to, or because they choose to, not because they need to, but many of the riders need to. And so if you want to see the population that needs transportation, I think, taking the transportation and going to various different places. And, you know, there's some wonderful agencies we have in town that are pretty unique to our area, or maybe not unique, but provide some things. For instance, I do not remember the title of them right now, but the entity that helps people with disabilities learn how to ride the bus is John, what is that one called?
I'm going to be doing a pretty thorough overview of some of our RideSource services coming up as part of our RideSource operations analysis agenda item. So I'll make sure we have a detailed version of that.
Right, and what I'm talking about is there is an entity I know that that I believe usually is funded through the Accessible Transportation Funds that actually works with individuals to help them learn how to safely ride the bus. So that, I'm sorry, I don't have the name right now, but
alternative work concepts.
Thank you. Yes, you know, places like that might be maybe not unique to our community, but provide services that are not in every community that support people who need accessible transportation.
Fantastic, fantastic. Appreciate the quick comments and the quick review. These are usually, you know, a round table of anywhere from 10 to 15 folks, and conversations have lasted anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. So know that we are part of a comprehensive agenda for you all today, and appreciate the opportunity to carry out this discussion here. We have one more session, and at 4:45 to reveal what time zone I'm in at 1:45, and then that'll put a bow on our outreach and engagement process. So really looking forward to the next steps, sharing the summation of the feedback, seeing those elements reflected in the job description. And then looking forward to opportunities for finalist candidates to have the opportunity to engage and meet members of the community before the board makes its final decision. The timeline on that is open. We are working towards probably a May, June type offer and start if we follow kind of the traditional timing of these flows, and if we're able to initiate our search in earnest in February. So if there are no further questions, comments for us, happy to yield my time back to your committee agenda. And thank you all very much for your feedback.
Yeah, and it was, you didn't have a full committee today, so it kind of fell on the two of you to give the input, but we really do appreciate the input you gave. It's all really helpful. Every group, you know, has been helpful, and as we're kind of putting together you know, the package for the general manager. So really thank you for that input. And I would just throw out to the board members while you're here too, to give an opportunity if you have any insight at this point to provide to Aaron. We got a couple minutes. Well,
so I think that I would like to ask as the chair that maybe as we're sending out the invitations for this meeting, perhaps we could have everybody put next to their name their role, because there are many people on this call, and I'm not sure who's a board member, who is a committee member, and who is LTD. Absolutely. So that would be very helpful. I see Susan has her hand raised. I'm sorry, I just saw that. I hope it wasn't up for long, okay. Susan.
I have a question, Aaron. I was very interested in your comment about in some areas they require that the GM ride the bus on a regular basis. Is that how commonplace is that? And has that made a difference or been effective?
Well, it's interesting. Commonplace, I don't know that I could statistically define it for you anecdotally, and Mike may have, you know, some experience, but you know, I would say 1 in 5. I mean, I think that there's some expectation that you use the service. They're its biggest champion. It's great, right, for employees to see their general manager and CEO climbing the bus and taking it to a meeting. And I think there's a reasonable expectation that you know, the connection, right? We probably have a socioeconomic mismatch between housing and executive housing and destinations and whatnot. But there is a more than implied expectation that our leader uses the service, right? And you know, they don't make the person count trips or anything like that, but you know when somebody's on it, and you know when somebody's not. And so, yeah, I think I actually had a search process one time where the board chair, we submitted finalists for the interview. I may have even told you this anecdote, but we submitted finalists. And so the candidates were all working at other transit properties around the country. And the board chair Googled their residence on their resume and determined whether or not it was even on a transit route. And in the question then, in the interview would ask, do you ride, or where do you ride? How often? I notice you don't live along a transit route. And at least, you know, said, this is important to me, and use the interview process to say, this is important to me. Mike, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I'm not aware of it being a hard requirement any place that I've encountered so far, but I am aware of several programs where, some of which I've implemented, where we required senior staff, including the general manager, to not only ride, but to do something as a follow-up, to file a report, to evaluate things. And I think it's very helpful. During the questioning, I think maybe that's something we should pursue also, so that we present you, since obviously that's important, that we present you candidates who can answer that question in a positive way. So we'll ask them to talk about your experience as a rider. How often? How do you use it? Did you were daily? What was your experience? How did you go about making sure your senior staff was paying attention to the rider experience? And people who have good answers for those questions will move, when I'm doing the interviewing, when I'm doing the initial screening, they'll move up on my list. People who say, I don't know, they're not going to move up on my list. But I think that's a very valid way to ask about empathy, to ask about experience, and to go back to one of Aaron's earlier questions. I would think that a non-transit professional who came along, who evidenced a lot of sensitivity to the customer experience, might move up to the list also, just because that's more important than knowing how to write a schedule or do preventive maintenance.
That's what I was going to say. If this is someone that comes from the industry, of course, they're going to have had opportunity. But if what we're looking at is someone that isn't in that space, then of course that isn't going to be a part of their history. So to try to figure out a way, as you were saying, Michael, to get that information in part of it is, would you be committed to doing that if you were selected? So thank you.
Good idea.
Great. Mr. Knox.
I just wanted to say thanks to the CATC members that have put in their input here. I've taken some notes on these things, and I think there's some really important things that have come up, especially with understanding the disability community and some of the challenges they have riding the bus, and if they don't already have that experience, that they at least are aware of it and can want and have a desire to learn about that. So I appreciate the input.
Thank you.
All right,
Any other thoughts
so
and comments?
it,
Yes,
it
thank you.
seems like perhaps that might be the end of this discussion right now. I know that we did sort of jump into this before, you know, some of us had really fully gotten into meeting mode. So if anybody has anything to add later on, please let me know. Oh, sorry, Don, now I see your hand up.
Well, this hasn't been in any of our questionnaires so far, but the last hire we made for the general manager, the board required the general manager to actually purchase property in town. Kind of a, you know, didn't want to have somebody who was just going to blow in and go away. They had to make a commitment to be here for a little bit, and that commitment required that purchase. Is this a, well, I wouldn't say common, but is this a attribute that's required in other agencies?
Property purchase, residency requirement in the municipalities served is definitely something common. Mike, do you have a experience on a property purchase?
No, that's a new one on me. I'm aware of a couple of colleagues who've had that discussion with the board during the interview process, and they've agreed, and in some cases, especially where somebody's going from the Midwest to the West Coast, where there's a difference in real estate prices, where there's been kind of a mutual commitment where the board assists with the purchase, maybe with a loan, a forgivable loan or something like that, and the individual then commits to do that. But I've not seen it as not seen it as a sort of a peremptory commitment requirement before the individual is considered.
But
there are certainly
the question
that have residency requirements for public officials. So it's not uncommon for a city to require the chief of police to reside in the city or something like that. It's not an unprecedented thing.
You know, it's not the point you're making by asking the question, but it's a point I take away. And I would say Mark would agree as an observer to all these conversations that there is a strong desire to find somebody that is truly committed to this region, that is truly committed to this community, that, you know, we're not, a strong desire from the community to not be anybody's stepping stone. And I think that'll be really important for us to find somebody that is authentically excited about this being their destination. And so that, to me, you know, huge takeaway as we really start to engage the right personality for us.
One of the things that probably almost requires is that when we get down to a very short list, we provide an opportunity for the individual to visit the community.
Yeah. Do a look-see visit. Yeah.
Which makes sense anyway, in any case.
Okay.
All right, so are we finished with that discussion? Any more comments? I don't see any hands. Thank you all very much. Again, if anybody does have anything to add, because it sounds like, you know, today is sort of the last day, please feel free to contact one of the LTD members or me with any comments that we want to forward.
Looks like Director Norden has his hand up there real quick.
Okay, all right. Don.
Sorry. He muted.
You're muted, Don.
The icon seemed to change. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was just aware that other boards that I have been on, I'd asked the members whether they had been contacted or on the list. And I have a couple of people who were not on the list, and I looked on the roster of the people involved, and they weren't on the list. So is there still an opportunity to get involved with those folks?
No, Don. Today is the last day of meetings. We reached out to all the board members last week and sent a list and asked for any omissions then. But, you know, we've done quite a bit of outreach, and, you know, today's the last day.
Last day now.
Okay, so I am fearful that I am going to lose my remarks again. And because I'm going over the survey, I would like to get to those. So if there are any further comments, I will get to them afterwards. My computer has crashed twice during this meeting, so I believe I need to just get to this so we can get through it quickly. So I apologize if anybody has anything further. So I wanted to thank everybody who completed the survey and then just go over a couple of the items. And Don, I think you said it very simply. One of the questions was, why are you involved with this committee? And you said, because it is important that all of the members of our community have transportation services. I think that that is a really beautiful statement, because it does not, you know, necessarily state accessible or not. Everybody should have transportation services that work for them. So I think that that's probably why we are all here. Two of the people who responded spoke to lived experience using accessible transportation and how they hope to use their understanding and perspectives to help shape transit in the future. And that might be through policy, funding decisions. And then there was a very specific request that I think sort of speaks to the possibility of looking towards systemic or policy work that we could be looking at on this committee. And that had to do with disability awareness signage on the buses for both the drivers and riders, including some understandable explanations of the ADA, for instance, and how it can be applied to make sure that every rider on the bus receives a sense of inclusivity and community. And I just thought that was a really great idea. And coming from someone with lived experience and a community member, I think that it's really important. And that's why we have this kind of committee, is to be able to try and bring, you know, things like that forward. The kernel of that idea is making sure that people understand all of our community and its accessibility needs. And I think that that is important. And so looking at how we can systemically sort of embed that kind of idea, both through signage, but through anything else. And the other piece of that was providing, if we don't already, providing ADA education to LTD drivers to make sure that riders with disabilities have an experience that actively supports them. And again, that's something that if we are not already doing that would be great. And possibly having somebody, you know, making sure that we have all kinds of people with experience kind of helping to interpret or cast eyes on that, the education piece, to make sure that it is really speaking to all kinds of lived experience as writers. So, you know, a question kind of comes up is how this committee could support requests like these: signage, driver education, sort of systemic changes. And I was going to ask the LTD staff what that might look like for this committee to move ideas like that forward.
Thanks for bringing that up. I think this is a really good way for us to be able to add these kinds of ideas onto the working agenda of the CATC, which then could result in formalized motions that could go before the board for recommendations for policy changes, service updates, or things that might impact the system as a whole. So I think these kind of activities are where the CATC group can put together ideas for future meetings that we can have as agenda items and topics for discussion. And then from that work can come service recommendations, policy recommendations that could go before the board.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, you know, I know that that is very helpful for me to know and understand that we can actually, you know, talk through and move some of these ideas forward. I wanted to, and there was another idea that I think is really important, and that is, I don't know, again, LTD might have done this, but sort of looking at youth in our community also as a group that needs special study to be able to support their needs, as opposed to, you know, we might have surveys that we give out generally to ridership, but do we do any particular outreach to youth to understand their needs? And if we do we have youth helping to develop those types of outreach? So that was another thought that came up in the survey. So I wanted to just bring that forward also. My thought is to actually put some time on the next agenda for these items so that we can actually talk about them more deeply and decide if there is anything we can move forward with. So that will be the next step for this. And again, I would ask that anybody who has any ideas that they want to move forward could reach out to me with those ideas as they come up, because we only meet quarterly. Things are happening very slowly. So this idea came up through the survey, and it won't be for another 3 months that we actually get it onto an agenda. And I would rather, if we have people who have ideas, to get those you know, flowing sooner. I would be happy to have discussions with any committee members about ideas they might have. There is also a suggestion about some curriculum development, and I wondered if anyone from LTD staff had gotten to the surveyee about that, and if not, I would be happy to follow up also. It sounds like somebody's either trying to unmute slowly, or there is possibly nobody who has responded to that, and I will be happy to do that myself, because I think it's a great idea. So there were some suggestions for agenda items on the, or that this is not what they were, but they occurred to me as further agenda items. Efforts to update the fleet. I wonder if that might be a regular item that we could just have a quick response to each time, if that makes sense. LTD employees, does that make sense to you?
It does, thank you.
Okay. I did not completely understand this one, but any changes in software the broker is using? Does that mean RideSource?
Yes, so Lisa, thank you for that. So yes, we use an operations software for our RideSource service, and we do update that, we do add to it. We have some changes coming up. We would be pleased to come back to this group and have a conversation with you all to provide an update.
So should we just add that to the agenda, and then we can have no update if there is none? And of course, how services are experienced by the user group. I would hope that that is something that simply would come up in these meetings. But again, is that, I'm not sure if that was talking about surveys, if we were talking about anybody who is on this committee bringing forth any thoughts from people they talked to. I really wasn't sure what that comment meant, but of course that this we are looking for patterns, not individual areas of improvement. So if one person has a challenging situation, we are hoping that that would go through the system and be addressed. But if there are ongoing patterns of challenges, I think that would be appropriately brought to this group. Does that make sense? Okay. Somebody had requested ride source reports. I don't know what those would look like. So again, I ask LTD, perhaps you, to respond to that.
So LTD does gather data. We can provide reports. It would be helpful for us to know what specifically you all would like to see in terms of reports. We can provide reports on ridership. We can provide, you know, several different types of reports. So if there's something of special interest, we're happy to share that with you.
And again, I believe that some of those things might be of more interest to some members than others. So it might be something that we, as the agenda is coming up, if somebody thinks of something and they see that the meeting is coming up, if you could provide a request early. I know that many of our members are hoping that any materials that we are presenting at this meeting will actually be available ahead of time so that we can actually engage with them and have you know, some information that we can bring to the committee, as opposed to getting it in the meeting and then not having time to process. So if you do have reports that you want, I would ask that you get them to us at least 2 weeks before. Is that reasonable, Cosette?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
so
we have to have our materials together 2 weeks before. So the earlier we can get it, the better we can make sure we're prepared. So 3 weeks would be best.
3 weeks, okay.
Yes.
And how early do we send out information that this meeting will be happening? Do we send it a month in advance?
So the meeting notice is already on our calendar. So we have regular meeting times that are already on the LTD website, for instance, on the calendar. The information packet goes out at least 1 week prior to the meeting. We have to have our materials all together and ready to go 2 weeks ahead of time.
And generally, we meet, I meet with the LTD staff to finalize the agenda 2 weeks out so that we can get that all done. I hear too, so if somebody needs to get us that information, they probably need to think about it a month before the meeting. Is that something that LTD can help with in terms of sending out a meeting reminder a month ahead, or should people simply put it on their calendar if they think they might want special reports?
I think either way works. However we get it, if we just get it in advance, at least 3 weeks ahead, that would be good. Again, the other thing we could talk about doing, and Lisa, maybe this is a conversation you can facilitate or you can give some thought to, and then as we meet later with staff, you can give us some direction. Perhaps we could create something like a dashboard that just provides some very high level information. And then if people want more information or more in-depth information, we can do that upon request.
I think that might be a great idea. And if we do that, again, we have the survey answers, and so we can definitely figure out who was asking that question and make sure that we get some of those reports specifically added to that. But I like that idea. And then people can interact with that dashboard. I think that I would like, if at all possible, to have LTD just do an automated request a month out saying that the meeting is in a month, and if they have any special information or reports that they want, that they need to get it in and you know, a week from today or whatever makes sense. And that way we've covered all our bases. I do continue to have concerns because I'm very happy that this meeting is quarterly in most ways, but because things can take so long to process through, that reminder might be very helpful. Does anybody have any comments about what we're talking about right now? I don't see any hands. Okay. And then there was a request to have some looking at senior communities and any changes in stops that affect people needing accessible transportation. And my guess is that that would be something that would be reported on as changes are happening. I think that we would be made aware of that. Is that true, Cosette?
So there's a lot of reasons that stops could be changed. We don't necessarily have a full-on conversation whenever we make changes on stops. Again, there's a lot of reasons that we could change stops. However, if we had a stop, for instance, that we knew specifically served people with disabilities or seniors, we would be happy to bring that to this group if we can do so in a timely fashion.
Okay. And I believe that, you know, with as you say, with all the stops that are happening and scheduling, et cetera, being such a complex thing, that is probably the best that we can ask for. And of course, please, anybody who has concerns or questions, make sure that you contact us at that 3-week window, if at all possible, with any concerns, so we can bring them before the group in a timely fashion. And that was all that I had for my remarks. So thank you all very much. I unfortunately, because of my computer issues, I am not able to look at the agenda. So LTD staff, can you help me? I don't know that I need to look at it. I think it's better for us to be able to see each other. Could you prompt me? I believe that our next thing would be simply to go to do I need to go read through all of the titles up till we get to section 8?
Well, I am happy to help with that, Lisa. So the next agenda item would be items for action, which there are none for this meeting. After that would come items for board recommendation. Again, there are none for this meeting. So the next agenda item in line is actually the ride source operations analysis. And we have John Allen and Hart Migdal to present on that agenda item.
All right, great, thank you. So let's move to that. John and Hart, it's your turn.
And Hart Zoom is moving him over as we speak. There we go.
Hello, sorry. Can everyone hear me now? Yep. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Hart Migdal. I'm a development planner at LTD. And John's here also to help me out and to answer any questions as we go through this. But we're here to talk about the comprehensive operations analysis for RideSource, which we've been calling the RideSource operations analysis. So it seems like a fitting committee, the title of this committee, to talk about this project, because we're looking at a comprehensive operations analysis for accessible services. So let's see. And everyone can see the first slide here. I have a handful of slides to hold this together, but really this is intended to be an introduction to this project. We're really just starting things off, and then hopefully a conversation after I get through sort of what this is about and what it covers, where we can talk a little bit about how to engage stakeholders in this project. So does everyone know what a comprehensive operations analysis is, what that refers to? Assuming that some of you folks have heard about Transit Tomorrow, that was the COA for primarily focused on fixed route services at LTD. It did look at just about everything that comes through LTD, but it focused on the services, bus services. And I think most people associate that project sort of with the final phases, which were really about changes to fixed route services. But really that project was comprehensive and started out with consultants looking at just about all the nuts and bolts and products of operations and service delivery at LTD. And this is a similar project that we're looking at, just focused on RideSource. And really the first time that we've ever done something like that. So a comprehensive operations analysis for RideSource means looking at all of the programs and all of the parts of the process that result in people getting moved from one place to another from multiple perspectives. So including, the agency, LTD as an agency, and RideSource and the call center and everything just about through to when people get to where they want to go. Excuse me. So I think, that's a little bit about the what, but, more importantly, why would we do an operations analysis for RideSource? Like I said earlier, and this picture actually was to help remind me to say this. This is a picture that I found in the archives of a woman boarding a bus, I think in the 1970s, an LTD bus equipped with a lift. But it was supposed to remind me, besides being what I thought was kind of a neat picture, to remind me to say that we haven't done this before. And so that's, this is really an opportunity, I think, for us to take a look at all of the things that RideSource does. And it's a really complicated and expansive program, or a number of programs. And so, this is part of the why, is that we'd really like to focus on RideSource and take a look at everything that RideSource does in a comprehensive way. And so this is our opportunity to do that. But also, the mission of LTD is connecting our community. So I think when we think about what we're doing now and what we want to do in the future, it really starts with the mission. And then it's also an opportunity for us to ask questions. So I have a couple of examples of questions on the slide. Certainly not a comprehensive list of the sorts of things we're going to be looking at, but the first came from the specialized services group. How can RideSource and LTD allocate resources to serve the greatest good for older adults and people with disabilities? So that's a general question that I think a lot of the details of an analysis like this will help us look at. Another was, what measures should RideSource and LTD prioritize to improve our performance? And I think there are many other broad and specific questions that doing an analysis like this will help us take a look at. Also, I think this group has gotten a presentation from my colleague, Kim Lay, who came and spoke about the LTD strategic business plan. But to tie the comprehensive, or the RideSource operations analysis, to something that everyone's familiar with, the 2022 to 2024 strategic business plan has a number of work plan tactics. This is one in the customer satisfaction area that was targeted. I think you could also arguably put it under community value as well. And that's where this as a formal project got started, though I know that we've wanted to do this for some time. And then John can help me out if I'm missing anything here, but just to be clear about what's included and what programs we'll be looking at. The big ones are, of course, ADA paratransit and the RideSource vehicle fleet. And then also we'd be looking at non-emergent transportation. Those are the two biggest programs with the most number of trips and the largest budgets overall. But we're also going to be looking at behavioral health transportation, crucial connections, DD53 work trips, mobility management, preschool transportation. the shopper shuttle, travel training, transit hosts, veterans transportation, volunteer escort, and probably some others. John, did you want to jump in to talk about this a little?
Yeah, I think we're hoping most of this at the end we'll have time for discussion, but I think this is a really important slide just because when people think about LTD, oftentimes they're thinking about our 40 and 60 foot fixed route buses, but RideSource is a essential and critical part of what we do. And then even within RideSource, a lot of times people think of these cutaways that are going around town, such as featured on the slide that we have listed, but RideSource is actually an umbrella term for many services that we do, many of those listed on the screen here. So I think one of the things that we're trying to learn both from this group and the community as part of this exercise is how as an organization do we best determine where to provide resources, what we're choosing to fund, where we're choosing to go, who we're picking up, and how we do that. And all of these services fall under this RideSource umbrella. So it's one of the great things that happens in our community is that we really have this kind of one-stop shop, one phone number that people call, and soon we're looking to implement online options as well, where people have the ability to book a wide variety of different types of trips. So the two main ones that people are likely familiar with are the 88 paratransit side, which is we'll go within a 3/4 mile boundary of anywhere that our fixed route buses go, in particular to serve people with disabilities who may not be able to use the fixed route bus. And then our Medicaid transportation, also called NEMT, which includes things like taxis and medical transportation around town. But even with those don't necessarily serve our entire community. And so we have many other programs that provide benefits either complementary to these or separately from to fill gaps. And so in some places we can be even more efficient by leveraging our community partnerships. And so a really good example was one that came up earlier today around travel training and transit hosts. We work with Alternative Work Concepts, and this is a fantastic program which allows for some folks with disabilities to be able to have opportunities to ride fixed route buses where they might not ordinarily be able to. And so that increases independence of the disability community here as a whole. It also happens to wind up coming with great incentives for LTD as well. So it's just a win for everyone to be able to implement programs like this. We also are able to do things like with our shopper shuttle during non-pandemic times, where it can be a social outing, oftentimes for older adults, to be able to go on a group trip to get their shopping done for the week and then get assistance carrying the groceries, which you couldn't do on a fixed route bus. So a driver typically isn't going to assist someone with their bags, but we might be able to do that on, say, a specific shopper trip. And we're able to group these trips together so it's a shared ride and it's more efficient and effective for everyone. So we have programs like these built into the RideSource umbrella. But what we as an organization have to choose is, how do we determine what are the right programs to fit under this RideSource service, and how do we make those kinds of decisions, and how are we doing that in a way that's equitable, that is of service to our community? How do we essentially, with limited resources, choose what we do, but also what are the lines that we want to draw, like in where we go and what programs that we offer? So there's lots of great examples here that include partnerships that let us do more than we ever could on our own. So working with folks like Whitebird Clinic to provide behavioral health transportation. We work with LCOG and Senior Disability Services to be able to do waivered transportation. We're working with the state to provide work trips. We're working with Pearl Buck Center to provide preschool transportation, all these different programs to try and be of service to the community. And just how can we do that in a way where we can be of best use and best service to the community that we all live in. So that's I think kind of the underlying kind of impetus for a lot of what we're doing through this operations analysis. So I just want to make sure to highlight that section before moving on.
Thanks a lot, John. Yeah, that is a much better description of the why, and more specific, I think, in some ways than how I presented it earlier. But that's really great way of putting it. And I think, as John, or I think as I said earlier, this project's really in its infancy, and so we're just putting together a scope of work. But I know that some of the outcomes that we want are what John's talking about, to help us figure out how to be strategic and also how to do the best with what we have among all these programs. But it's also to share information about this, because there's a lot going on that I think I know LTD staff don't all know, and probably various board members and committees don't know the scope of all of these services. And so some of this is to create some awareness and information around it, and then also to do what John's saying, to help us be more effective as we provide these services. And so, as I said, we're just starting we're finalizing, I guess, a draft of a scope of work, but we've identified some key outcomes in it, or otherwise known as deliverables sometimes. And so those are starting with a public involvement plan. So that's so that as we start this project, we really know who the stakeholders are and when they're going to be involved and engaged with this project. So we want that to come first in the project. We'll be working with a consultant to help produce something like this that can be public and shareable, so people know how they can learn more about the project and how they can get involved. We're, the sort of core and foundation of the project is really this baseline analysis. And from that, everything else comes. So the baseline analysis would be all of the context, the resources, the performance of all of the RideSource operations. And then that helps us look at where we're finding challenges and sometimes opportunities to improve things. So we'd ask that the consultant can put together some best practices and maybe on a national scale or peers that are somehow comparable to the types of programs that we're looking at, and help us improve in those areas. And then also something we've been developing is trying to figure out how to create a program evaluation framework so that we can assess some of the linkages between programs, which things provide the kind of redundancy that you want, where people have multiple options to get where they're going. Are there gaps between the programs, and how do we evaluate the linkages between investments to one program, like John was talking about the transit hosts program? How can we evaluate, when we invest in that program, what are the effects on ADA paratransit, and what are the positives? In some cases, what are the costs of investing in one area? Because that usually means that you can't invest to the same degree in another area. So we're looking at we want to develop some kind of evaluation framework that I think creates something comprehensive that we can look at programs across the board. And then also some strategic questions. I think it's an opportunity, after we've established that baseline analysis and we've looked at some challenges, and we have a framework that we can use to assess some of the different programs. This could be an opportunity for us to ask some questions that help us, look more in detail at things like the technology that we're using. Is it the right technology for us? What are our options there? What are the costs and benefits of making a change or sticking with what we've got? And so we'd ask the consultant to put together, I think we've got it written as 3 or more of these sorts of things we want to look at more in depth. And then, of course, a formal final report that's going to help synthesize, I think, all the things that come above that and before that, and help us look comprehensively at everything that RideSource does. And so, yeah, that's an overview of where we're at so far with this project, but we really want to open it up because it's, having a group like this engaged in the project, I think we've come at the right time before we've even started the project so that we can talk about it with you guys. And Also, I think in particular, I'd like to hear if you have some ideas or comments around how we can engage this group or other stakeholders in RideSource. What do you think the best ways are? And if you have any comments about things you want to make sure that we're including and taking some time to investigate. And John, is there anything you want to say to help tee up the combo?
I think you made some really great points. We're just trying to find a method through this process where we get to know what's working, what isn't, what could be better. It can be things like, how are wait times? Are the vehicles giving us a rough ride? Are they too bumpy? We want to know about programmatic, big picture efficiencies that we could be doing, how we can be most helpful, I think, to folks as either for you as riders or as representatives of groups of riders, older adults, people with disabilities. And just to also, I think before we start that discussion, we're looking for all that input. We're also letting you know, we don't need to wait for a final report from consultants to be able to make improvements. So just a heads up that we already see areas that we can make change and that we're actively working towards doing that. So I had mentioned we're looking to implement some online options so the telephone isn't the only way to be able to schedule trips. Also just making a more comprehensive website presence for people to get information, ride guides, things like that. So a lot of that's in progress, but we're really looking for information from the group at this very, very early stage of when we're bringing in consultants to help us evaluate the operations of RideSource as a whole. What are the things that we need to make sure that we identify, ask for? What are the things that we need to ask them to be looking at, who they need to be talking to incorporate into this final report that we're getting?
Is RideSource available to high school and college students? And if so, how do they manage parking and everything? Because let's say I go to UVO, I need RideSource. Where is there, like what I'm thinking of is I don't find anywhere they can park. So like, how do we do that?
That's such a great question. One of the great things about RideSource, we have drivers and teams who have a lot of experience being able to navigate this, and it can be very challenging. Oftentimes, if someone just gives us an address, if it's in our service area, that's where we're going to go. But we've also been doing this so that we have some experience in saying, oh, well, we know if someone's going to this area, we can't just drop them off right at say the location that's going to show up in Google Maps. We have to go to this, whether it's side door or through an alley or wherever it might be. It's also one of the reasons why we use smaller vehicles, say a 40-foot bus or a 60-foot bus won't be able to navigate some of these tight spaces, but one of our smaller vehicles might. The service itself typically drops someone off wherever we can reasonably get close, and then we come back when for the return trip or return pickup for many of these services. So depending on the circumstances, the vehicle only needs to be present for loading and unloading, and then it's going to be on its way after that. And I would say that essentially becomes kind of our job and our problem to figure out how to best be able to drop someone off as close as possible to their door or destination. And I would say we do the best job that we possibly can at that. But our intention is to make that as easy a process for the rider so that they don't have to worry about, they just have to tell us where they're going and we'll figure out the rest.
Thank you.
Can you?
I'm sorry, I just needed to say something. Unfortunately, this is off topic. I need to leave at 2:30. I had meant to bring this up earlier. Is there someone else on the committee who could finish out the agenda for me this afternoon? One of our board members maybe who's on the committee?
I could do that.
Thanks.
Is that Pete? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
What time would you need to go?
Probably 12:28.
2:28. Okay, got it.
I mean 2:28. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Done.
Hi. Does this include by being able to schedule an appointment on online?
That's a really good question, Hoover. Thanks. So we're looking at ways that we can most efficiently and effectively schedule. And one of those, even before getting a report back from a consultant or evaluating services, we just know that online scheduling needs to be an option. So we're not waiting to hear that from someone, we're pursuing it already. So it is one of the things that we're looking to implement. However, there's always going to be room for us to be looking at how does that work? What could be going better? How does that best integrate into the system? Like, what kinds of things do we need to hear? What kinds of further interactions? How do we make that as seamless a process as possible? So we might continue to solicit or get feedback on that, but we're certainly not going to wait. We already have plans to implement some online scheduling options for trips.
Okay.
Don?
Don, you're muted. Don, we're unable to hear you. I think you're still muted.
I'm sorry, my screen wasn't responding. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thanks.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. There's so many things I will assume we're doing. You mentioned the consultants. Have you identified your consultants yet? Are they a group of people you're going to select from, or have you selected somebody?
That's a really good question.
Yeah,
sorry, Hart, go ahead.
I was going to say, no, we haven't. We're still drafting the scope of work. And so we're putting the final touches on that, but we haven't put it out to bid yet. So we don't know yet what type of proposals we'll get.
This is essentially our first stop, and we wanted to get feedback even before we reached that point. So just be very communicative with this group and to the community. And then, so just to be transparent, one of the things that we're looking to this group is we're going to be selecting a consultant. What are the qualities that we should be asking for? What are the things that we want to learn? How do we make the best use of this process, which we're expecting to be iterative. So this isn't the only time that we're going to be having this conversation, but want to right from the beginning, just to make sure that we are working in lockstep and just very closely with disability community, with older adults, with folks that can best be a part of this process every step of the way, to be able to make sure that we get the most out of it. So I think this opens that dialogue, but we are before the point where we have even solicited bids for a consultant at this point. So very early in the process.
So we're also working with, RideSource is essentially a mobility on demand thing, but it's also moving into a more, AI direction. Is that how you're approaching it also? Is that perhaps we won't be doing all of these with drivers trips? Maybe some of them will be done by autonomous vehicles and so on. It may not be appropriate there for people who need assistance getting on and off, but it may be something to add to our mix. Just a thought.
So I just had the opportunity to go to Washington to attend the Transportation Research Board. And at TRB, there's some research papers coming out about autonomous vehicles, and especially in mobility on demand. So I know that there's a lot of research being churned through right now. My understanding is that there aren't a lot of mobility providers on the scale of RideSource doing anything large with autonomous vehicles yet. But it does seem like the industry is starting to look at it and research, all the different angles of changing how they do service delivery. And so I would expect that it wouldn't be a fundamental part of this project, because we're really looking at what we're doing currently first. That's sort of the analysis of everything that's happening today. But there are a number of opportunities that we're hoping in the proposal from a consultant that they can respond to some of the challenges we had and suggest different technologies. And so to the extent that there might be some good research or good case studies coming from other places that are providing mobility using autonomous vehicles, maybe we would hear about it in the work of our consultant. Susan's hands up. Sorry, I should be doing a better job looking for hands.
Don, are you finished? I want to make sure he was. I guess this is all really very interesting and exciting, and appreciate being a part of it. One of the questions that I have, if you were putting together now the scope of work prior to soliciting a proposal, is that something that this committee will have an opportunity to look at and say, ooh, this seems just perfect, or could you tweak this, or have you forgotten this? Will there be an opportunity for this committee to be involved with that?
I think the draft scope of work that we're putting out for consultants, I don't think that's in our timeline to have it up for review by this committee, but we're writing it in such a way that it's, we're not saying, task 1.1.E5, do exactly this. We're trying to have it be something that's pretty open so that we can get proposals that, based on the expertise of our consultants and their experience, we're hoping to get some creative proposals. And so I would assume that when we start working on an actual scope of work for the work that's going to take place after the bid process, maybe that would be a good time where we could share the working scope of work and make sure that that our work plan reflects what this committee is looking for in this project.
So the scope of work is going to be done before you put together the bid for proposals?
So the scope of work, and I'm not a procurement expert, so what I know that we're working on is we've outlined what our project, what we're looking for in general. And before we did that, actually, we asked for some scope of work examples from other agencies that have done something like this. And actually, very few, from what I can find, have done a very focused, comprehensive operations analysis just for their paratransit side. And I think also there aren't many other agencies with something like RideSource, with as many programs as RideSource operates. But so we did look at some of what they've got, and that's what we've developed, based on that information and based on talks, LTD staff talks. We've put together something that I think is more open-ended that goes with, and I assume that then the consultants will review that and they can make a bid based on that and outline in their proposal based on what we've asked for, what they suggest they would do. And I don't know if that answers your question at all, but
that's helpful. I guess and I'm sorry, I'm new to this process, so I don't know how many of these opportunities there have been for the disability community to provide input. But so I see that as what you're gathering now, but is there going to be an opportunity for the community to see how you've interpreted or what you've heard and then made as priorities? I'm not wanting to make a lot of extra work at all, but just seems to me that if the community saying, wow, this is perfect, it's going to just be a smoother possibility or process moving forward.
I mean, I definitely think that I had discussed that we'll have a stakeholder or a public involvement plan at the start. And so, you know, that is focused on how we engage the community. And so I think that will be publicly available. And that, I think, is an opportunity to take a look at what points are we asking for input and how do we expect to use the input is a really important part of that, because you can get as much input as you want and then not use it in the course of the project. So I think by doing that at the start of the project, our hope is that we can get, and we can share that, we can get some feedback right away about how we're going about this project, and adapt from there if necessary and make changes.
And I think just to reinforce, and I think Hart can attest that I've strongly advocated that at every point in this process, we will be including people within the disability community and emphasizing the nothing about us without us portion of just how critical it is that older adults and people with disabilities are completely integrated throughout every step throughout this operational analysis. So just to be really clear about kind of the process or timeline, this is the earliest portion in which we could have any kind of community involvement. And the consultants themselves will be essentially bidding upon the work based on the scope. But once they are selected and begin work, the work itself will be to be inclusive of people who ride source, use it, people who represent organizations of people who use ride source, and to collect that kind of input into letting us know how we as LTD can best serve the community. So my expectation is that this work will be highly inclusive of people with disabilities, to the point where it will be embedded in the fabric of the final product in the report itself.
That's great, thank you.
Don?
Perhaps this is not part of your scope of work, but of course we're going to be replacing that fleet, and I assume we'll be moving toward electric vehicles. How is your effort being coordinated with the basic fleet replacement plan?
That's a really, really important point that we want to make sure gets addressed. And we actually have been making efforts separately and on a faster timeline around fleet replacement through our fleet procurement plan. So that's actually the first kind of stage of the fleet procurement plan has been for the fixed route fleet for the 40 and 60 foot buses. Currently, right now, our fleet team is working with that same group around the paratransit fleet and our rural transportation fleet. So, you know, we've got approximately 70 vehicles that are spread throughout RideSource and other similar services. So that report is forthcoming, and that will be happening sooner rather than later. But we will definitely be looking at the results of that, how that gets incorporated in this type of analysis. So the size of the fleet that we have, the shape of the vehicles that we have, so that we could have anything between from a sedan to a bus, and modern technologies are creating new options. All of that, I think, are things that we're considering is what's the right size of our different fleets. So that's our internal fleet with LTD logos on them in our external fleet, which includes taxis, medical transports, ambulances, secure transports, minivans, others. So we have a lot of different options. And then within that, another component is what's the fuel type. So gas, diesel, electric, propane. There's a lot of different options that are currently out there, hydrogen. We'll be looking at that, I think, on a more accelerated timeline using the fleet procurement plan, but results from that might get incorporated into the operations analysis as well.
Okay, great, guys. We are bumping up on time here, so I'd like to thank Hart and John for coming, and we got our next topic coming up, which is the developing LTD service restoration strategy. And Camille, I assume you're going to bring Tom over here.
I'm here.
Yes.
Ah, cool. I didn't even notice you. Sorry. So Tom, take it away.
Okay, and Camille, I asked Jake to join me as well, if you could bring him over.
Yes, absolutely. I am just waiting on Zoom to make the pull over. He is en route.
Excellent.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, hello everyone. It's good to be here. I was actually back in Washington D.C. last week, and was at the same conference Hart referenced, and there is, like he said, a lot of conversation around technologies and electrification, what that means for transit. But what I'm here today, along with Jake, to talk about is the status of our return to quote unquote normal in terms of our ridership levels and our operations. We have some materials that were in the packet, and I have an update to that information today that I'll share with you to discuss kind of where we're at with respect to ridership, but also some of the challenges that we've faced in hiring enough operators to actually be able to add service. So first of all, just as a little more context, we had scheduled this conversation to give the committee the opportunity in the timing of your meetings to really weigh in on the service that we were planning to add, and this would have been for what we call the summer bid. The summer, so there's just to orient you, we have 3 bids a year. Bids are the term that we use where the operators actually literally bid on the service that they want, and of course that's by seniority. And we have one for the summer, which is basically late June is when the service starts. We have one for the fall, which is typically late September, or it has been. We try and align it with the U of O schedule. And then we have one in the winter, which would take place typically at the end of this month. But with respect to where we're at this point, and I'm sorry, I didn't turn on my camera so you all can see. At this point, where we're at is because of the shortage of operators, we've made a decision to not make any changes to the existing level of service. That service is a level that we started back in late September. In fact, it might have been early October. And again, with the driver shortage, we don't have the resources to add additional service for the upcoming winter bid, or at this point in our hiring process, we're not confident that we'll be able to add service in the summer. So it's likely that we won't have service adds happening until the fall bid. So it'd be fall like I said, late September of 22. But what we wanted to talk about today then is really to give you an overview of where we're at with the ridership, like I said before, and also Jake's here to answer I'd say any questions you might have related to the operator shortage and kind of what the challenges are. Again, back in DC, both Hart and I heard from other transit operators, this is a national issue in terms of getting bus operators across the country. So to begin with, I am going to share my screen and give you some information. To start with, some of you, I think the board members in particular, have seen this report. It's one that we were giving on a fairly regular basis early in the pandemic, but it's something that we've kept generating to give ourselves a kind of an view of where our ridership is. So this top chart here is I think really illustrative of kind of where we're at and where we're going. And so I'll describe it. It's a bar chart showing ridership by day for the last 4 weeks. And so this shows, you know, in the beginning of December, when there's that kind of we're through the downturn that you typically see during Thanksgiving, but we're headed into Christmas. Our ridership was for that week of December 13th, we were averaging about 14,000 rides per day. And just for context, we've put in some dashed lines on this bar chart just to show you a couple of things. We have a green dashed line around 13,000 boardings a day, and that was the average weekday boardings for all of 2021. And so you can kind of see we're with the exception of the Christmas holidays, we're starting to see ridership that is consistently above that number. So that's a good thing for 2022. And then we also had a dashed orange line to show the 2020 average weekday boardings, which was closer to 11,500. And so you can see between 2020 and 2021, we saw some uptick in ridership, but again, not back to our normal, which was closer to it was closer to 30,000 rides per day. So you know, we're not quite at half of our ridership from pre-COVID. We also laid in a black dashed line at about 8,000 rides, which was just to show you what the lowest boardings were during the pandemic period, which happened in April of 2020. So that gives you a good sense of kind of where we were at. And again, if you look at the last week, which is the week that we have the data for most recently, you can see that you know, we had actually some ridership that was bumping over 16,000, and so that's a good sign. And again, we'll continue to monitor this. One of the things that we're interested in is to see what the proportion of our overall ridership is on MX relative to the rest of the system. And during the pandemic, we've seen it upwards of 50%. We expect that as so it's been carrying a lot of the ridership during this period of time, and what we would project is going to happen as we are able to add more of our the rest of our service, is that you'll see that proportion go down to what essentially was pre-COVID, which was about 35 to 40%. So just kind of an interesting note there. Moving on to the next slide, we had we looked at, we have different types of service that we characterize or categorize as connector service, our rural service to areas outside the metro area, our urban service, and then our core service, which is the more frequent service, our MX service, and then our college service. And you can see by type of service, the predominant boardings happen on the core routes in MX. And so, you know, if you remember what we had on the last chart there, we had you know, about 50% of the ridership is on MX now. And if you look at the level of ridership for the core service, you know, we're probably carrying about 85% of our ridership is on those two systems. So that's just a good indicator. The other thing that we tracked over this period of time was boardings for trips ending after 8:30 p.m. In other words, the later night service, who's riding that? Because if people are riding the bus after that point in time, they really need to have the transit operating. And we've consistently seen about anywhere from 800 to 1,000 people on an average weekday over the course of the pandemic. And so that's, you know, remains an important service for folks. And feel free to ask any questions that you might have as we go through this. The last, whoops, there you go. Yeah, the last chart. I guess I have one more. This chart shows you kind of historically. So if you look at the bottom, there's a bar chart that goes from March of 2020 all the way to last week. And it shows you the average weekday boardings during that period of time. And you can see we have a couple of weeks that were just the weeks prior to really the big drop in ridership there, where we're carrying 35,000 people on an average weekday. And so we're a ways away from that, but you can see that over time, particularly starting in this fall, our ridership has started to trend upward. And of course, you see every year looks the same for the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. You see that dip that's happening, but again, this last week we were back to kind of what we've seen in terms of that higher ridership. One of the things that we, from an operational standpoint, look at is what's the ridership like? What's the market for transit over the course of a given day? And so this is the average boardings by hour for each of the average kind of weekdays that we've taken. So the most recent one is the one that's in front. And you can see there's a distinct peak that we have in the morning, and then one that is actually in the mid to late afternoon, the 3 p.m. Time frame. The morning peak at 7 is driven largely by commuters, though there are some students riding at that time of day as well. But the evening or the afternoon peak is driven heavily by when high school students in particular and U of O students are out, or at least using transit for their ride. And then again, it typically, as you can see, diminishes to the end of the day. So that gives you a sense of that's our typical pattern. And you can see the larger the orange and the blue lines, the larger shapes there, are the pre-COVID times. And what we like to see is the fact that we've returned to that peaking characteristic of our ridership. It means there's some normalcy starting to emerge in what we do. So we'll see. We keep tracking this information on an ongoing basis. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to happen before we see, you know, the workforce back full pre-COVID levels, and how they're going to adapt to transit in this kind of post-COVID world. But that's our fixed route service. And then I'm sorry, the other, stay put, there we go. The other thing that we have tracked over this time is the ride source service. So we've got call volumes there at the top, and then non-emergency medical trips, NEMT trips, and then ADA related trips. And you can see those have been fairly consistent. Again, they're the same kind of patterns that you see in our fixed route service. You're going to see here in terms of holidays and whatnot, in terms of how that affects various trips. So that's the overview of the service. And again, as I said before, you know, we are really, you know, our ability to add service is really affected by our ability to hire drivers. And maybe Jake, if you want to say just a few things about kind of what the state of that or the status of that is, and kind of your perspective, that might be helpful.
Sure. So yeah, it's just been challenging. It's not just drivers, or we've also been actively recruiting for public safety officers, and that's been a challenge as well. But we'll start the conversation with some good news. So we started a class of 9 operators on Monday. Currently, the largest class that we're able to do with our instructors is 10. So that's a real positive. It's been a year and upwards of a year and a half that we haven't been able to start with that many operators. We've been consistently more around 4 or 5. And then we also had a lower success rate in regards to the operators completing the training. Along with that, we had 2 public safety officers that also started on Monday, which will get us close to our actual budgeted numbers. So that's been a welcome addition. We've had to, just to sustain the service that we're currently running, we've had frontline employees, bus operators, and public safety officers working a lot of overtime. So that means we call them RDOs, working their days off, working before and after their shifts. Again, just to sustain the regular service that we have. But we're at a level now with this new class, once they get trained, that we should be pretty comfortable to sustain this service. We have another class planned in February. This original class was going to be a class of 4 or 5. We moved it out a week just to get everybody, as many operators as we could in the class, because it's taking an exorbitant amount of time to also get other things completed. In other words, background checks and those type of things. So it's not just LTD, it's the other agencies that we need to get everybody's CDL and CDL tests and all those things for them qualified to get them in the door. But again, we're looking pretty positive that we might be able to actually, and I'm not going to let Tom hold me to this, but make some kind of ads in the summer if we continue at a rate that we're at currently.
Excellent. And then, John, I don't know if you have any information on hiring ride source drivers, but I hear that's been somewhat of a struggle as well.
Yeah, I can confirm there's been similar challenges recruiting and retaining all employees and operators in particular right now has been an ongoing challenge. We've been working with all of our contractors to try and find ways, whether it's being creative, allowing for flexible schedules, sign-on bonuses, pay increases. We've been trying all of that, and it is a very challenging market. We're also losing employees. I heard that we've lost a driver from RideSource getting hired over to the fixture outside at LTD. So there's also turnover that goes in those kind of directions as well. I would say we can use all of the community's help that we can get. If you know anyone who might be interested in a rewarding career, check out driving at LTD and RideSource. Those are we're definitely looking for more folks right now, and it's created some issues also with our external fleet. We've noticed some external fleet providers shuttering their doors due to the business environment changes from the pandemic, and not being able to have workers to be able to continue fulfilling their business needs. So we've noticed a reduction in the number of external providers and the amount of service that they're able to provide pretty much across the board.
Hey, gentlemen, I hate to cut you all off, but we got a couple administrative details to get over. And if you guys do have questions, I think you can send them through Camille. So thank you, Tom and Jake and John, all for giving us an update. It was an excellent update, and wish you luck in getting more drivers and getting that through.
We'll be back at your next meeting too, so there'll be an opportunity to have more discussion.
Great. So before I let you all get back to whatever reality you have to get back to, we got a couple administrative details. We somehow missed doing roll call, so I'm going to do roll call real quickly for the for those who are present. Okay, so Elaine, I believe she's not present. Rosanna.
Rihanna.
Oh, Rihanna, sorry. Mispronounced it. I see her. Okay. Kathy, I think she was here earlier and is has left. Hoover.
Present.
Excellent. Lise was here and also left. Susan Cox.
Present.
Don Nordum.
I'm here if I can get it done.
Okay, we got you, Don.
Okay.
And Pete Knox, that would be me, and I am present. So we do have future agenda topics. I think we have a very packed agenda for the April meeting, and so the current calendars at the very end of your packet. I don't know if we really need to go over that, but I think does anybody have anything they need to add before we adjourn? We got about 2 minutes.
I just want to thank you all for a great conversation, and Pete, thank you for stepping in to help facilitate the second part of that meeting.
Done it before. I'm sure I'll do it again. Cool. Well, without ado, I will give you about a minute back to your life, and have a great day, folks. And the meeting's officially adjourned.